It's a real delight to welcome Steve Worrall to the Caring CEO podcast. Great to have you with us, Steve.
Thank you, Graham. Great to be with you.
Steve, what does care in the workplace mean to you?
Care in the workplace, for me, Graham, goes directly to a concept of empathy and leadership. And what I mean by that is that if you truly, as a business leader, want to help your business achieve the best that it can, and you want to serve your customers and you want to play the role that the institution might play in the community around you, then it follows you want to create the very best environment that you can for your team, your employees to play their important role. And I think over many years, the single most important element for me that comes out of that then is the idea of empathy and connecting with each person to the extent possible, so that the team understand that there is both a consideration of their role in serving the organisation and the customers, but that the institution and the leaders in that company actually have an interest in the well-being and the outcomes that are delivered for each employee. And so care is very much about the commercial construct, I think, and about the basics of any business, because employees obviously play such a vital role in delivering the product or the service that company might be in the business of providing.
And in the last 18 months, we've had really turmoil like never before. And I've observed with lots of other organisations that mental health has greatly increased in prominence and importance. Is that your observation as well?
Without a doubt. I think this topic, Graham, has been a big issue for a long time, well before the pandemic. And many people in many workplaces have been thinking about it because it's been such a strong and present issue across our communities. But without a doubt, the pandemic has put that on steroids, right? We've seen a massive acceleration in people engaging digitally. And so there's the sense of digital exhaustion that comes up very often in the environment where you are working in a digital construct. But of course, across the community, we have so many people experiencing so many different stresses and strains at the moment, those in essential work, those working in hospitals, the teachers in schools, and the list goes on. And there's no question, mental health and the impacts that we see all around us are only increasing as a result of this moment we find ourselves in.
And how did you keep your finger on the pulse with your 2,000 odd employees? Did you have regular pulses or surveys to really monitor that?
We do. So there's a regular survey that we run, but I often find it's the anecdotal conversations that are most important. And in fact, I think even more important now, because the incidental conversations you might have in the hallway, or when you get grabbing a cup of coffee or a cup of tea between a meeting, or when you're simply walking to a meeting with members of your team, you have those conversations that often fill in the day. And I think if you were, as a leader, and in fact, I would say this for anyone, give you a real pulse about how people are feeling. The absence of that now in the reality of lockdown, I think, makes it even more important that we use those surveys and other ways in which we ask for direct feedback. But also then, we, like a lot of organisations, have set up more regular contacts, more discipline around one-on-ones, more frequent team meetings, more meetings that aren't just business related. We might just get together on a Friday afternoon for a social catch-up. And so that's been very much part of our thought process, because we are absolutely seeing an increase in stress and anxiety and the digital exhaustion that I mentioned earlier from the constant engagement with clients and partners over Teams and over digital platforms.
You were instrumental in the formation of the Corporate Mental Health Alliance. And for those that may not be aware of it, would you just explain briefly what it is and why you thought it was important to start?
Well, look, it goes back several years, Graham. I think over many years in business, I've have recognised or observed the importance. If you go back to your first question about care, if you and empathy, if you truly believe that caring for your team is part and parcel of what leadership is about, then it isn't too far a step to realise that well-being of your team is at the centre of that equation, and that's both physical and mental health. So many years ago, I think I came to this realisation, and perhaps also because of my own mental health. Right, there are times in my career where I've I felt like I've flourished and where I felt like I've been at my best, and then other times when I have not been. And as I've sort of examined those moments, you sort of think back, what was happening to me in my life, what was happening to me in terms of the environment I was working within, what were the leaders doing in that organization at the time that might have been contributing positively or negatively to my point of view. And I know I'm not alone in making all of those statements. And so several years ago, we came across the City Mental Health Alliance in the UK, which was set up following a series of suicides in the financial services and legal industries in the UK, in London. And Poppy Jarman, the CEO, had set that up back in 2013. And I got talking to Poppy about what she was doing and why, and I just felt that that sort of alliance would be really relevant and important in Australia. So getting together with a bunch of like-minded leaders across many different organisations, we figured, yes, let's form the alliance. And then the pandemic hit, and I suppose while we realised it was a really important conversation for lots of reasons, it's become even more important as a consequence of the pandemic and already what we've covered in this conversation. And so just getting started, of course, but we think there's so much that we can achieve together. And I think that's the key of the alliance. This is a topic that impacts all of us, any organisation, large or small, government, private sector. And we've all got so much to learn from each other. And that's what we hope the Alliance can provide as a focal point for that learning to be shared.
It reminds me a little bit in setup to the Male Champions of Change, or I think it's just called Champions of Change now, which was about really championing more women in senior leadership. And, it was CEOs that were involved. And I think that is a really critical element. Did you look at that model at all when you thought about how to launch it?
Totally. And we're involved in Champions of Change. Liz Broderick is a wonderful leader, and over the last decade or longer has helped to build the Champions of Change into such a wonderful organisation with such impact, not only here in Australia, but all around the world. So definitely talk to Liz and still do today in terms of learnings and what we can lift and copy to make the Alliance as impactful as possible. Over time, we hope we can make a material impact in the quality of thinking and the role that leaders play in organisations large and small across the country. Because the Alliance at its heart, Graham, it's not a membership organisation in any traditional sense. Everything that we have, every learning that we have, every case study, events that we make available, it's all open source. And so what's really struck me is the generosity of all of the business leaders who are involved, because we all want to come together to help each other and help every organisation create more psychologically safe workplaces in the future. Yeah.
And how was it to try and bring a very disparate group of people together and agree on, the plan, the measurement, the foundations? It must have been a little bit of a challenge, surely.
Oh, very much so. I remember the early days. I sent out emails to most of the leaders of the ASX 100, and all were interested. I think, to be fair, there are so many priorities going on. So in some cases, it just wasn't the right time to engage, or we quickly found those organisations who were at that point where they were ready to jump into something like this, knowing that there was no alliance in place. So it wasn't like we had a track record. We were just simply coming together to have a conversation about how could we raise the bar on the quality of psychological safety in our own organisations, and then how could we help others. We also approached a group of leaders in the space, the people who actually know who operate professionally in the mental health landscape, people like Lucy Brogden, who've been so generous with their time, because we also wanted to be expert guided but business led, acknowledging the important role that leaders play in creating the circumstances and the conditions for psychological safety at work. So yeah, difficult to get started, but I think, and difficult to agree to everything, Graham, to the other part of your question. But look, I think when your purpose is so clear, and it is so clear to each of us, that we know from the early moments that there was so much that we could gain from talking to each other and learning from each other, when the purpose is clear, then the rest of it becomes details in terms of, okay, if we can't agree on the specific survey that we might use collectively, or if we can't agree exactly on what the right first topic should be for us to explore, we will compromise and work that out as we have, and the Alliance continues to go from strength to strength.
I've heard from a couple of trusted sources that you're a gifted chair, a gifted team facilitator, and this has come from other people. So when you approach a meeting, and use that as an example, you've got a group of CEOs, how do you prepare for it? And what do you think are the really important elements of being a good chair?
Well, first of all, I think they may have overstated my capabilities there, Graham. Nice to hear, but I'm not sure that's deserved. So, look, I think I try to be pragmatic. I try not to take myself too seriously, and I try to inject, as a result, a little sense of humour as we go, because we're all busy. We've all got very many things to do, and we all want to have the most impact that we can. And so I think I start from that basic belief that respect the use of people's time. It's the most important commodity anyone ever has. Be clear on what we're hoping to achieve. Be open to feedback and make sure that we are aligned. And as I said a moment ago, I think the establishment of the purpose, we want to help raise the bar. We want to share credible practice and raise the bar for all workplaces across the country. And we want to be expert guided and business led. Pretty quickly, the business leaders, they all saw that made sense, and because they helped construct it. And once you've got that alignment, I think it brings people together quickly. And then we've rapidly fallen into position as a group. And, we're an alliance of a very eclectic mix of businesses across the country. And yet we have this uniformity of purpose, which I think then means we can actually make progress and make progress quickly. So I think there's some of the principles that I use.
And how do you make it psychologically safe, that people can contribute ideas and be themselves? Do you just do that intuitively, or do you have any hints when you think about that?
Well, I go back to that word we started with. You mentioned care, and I mentioned in response empathy, right? I think that there's an old saying around the difference between intention and impact. That is, my intentions, I often will measure my impact in the world based on my intentions, right? The things that I think and believe, that's how I view my impact. But of course, my impact is measured by how you listen to these words, Graham, and how you respond to what I'm saying. And your interpretation of how I come across is very different, can be very different to the intentions that I have. And if you just unpack that thought for a moment, if you realize then that we all in communication are trying to align our intent with our impact, right? We really want to make sure I want to bring together a group of people around this idea of a corporate mental health alliance. That's wonderful. How do you do that, right? How do you make sure that your words and your actions then align with that intent so that the impact that it's experienced is exactly as you'd like it to be? And so, back to the question of, how do you bring people together, and how do you then help have the intended impact? You've got to be thoughtful, and then I think open to that closed loop feedback and empathy. The ability, as poorly as I am able to demonstrate or to utilize empathy on any given day, as much as I try to, I know there are gaps, but I try hard at it, because I think the more that I can put myself in your shoes and understand, how you might be experiencing and listening and receiving this message, the more likely I am to then be able to ensure that there is alignment between my intention and how you're receiving it. And so, empathy, I think, is an often used word and expression, but it's so vital, I think, as a leader at any time, but perhaps more important now, because if I come back to the pandemic, just for a last thought here, Graham, there's such a Genevieve Bell said this so well at the beginning of the pandemic, a professor at ANU, when she said that she observed you can't totalize this moment, the experiences that everyone is having. And this is back in, I don't know, April or May of last year. And I remember reflecting at the time, thinking how insightful that simple observation was, because over the last 18 months, I've seen time and time again how individually challenging this moment is, whether people are living at home and are now in lockdown and feeling further isolated, whether parents are at home trying to homeschool kids, whether people in our teams might have aging parents, and all that entails. And I'm one of them at the moment, grappling with a mother who has severely progressed dementia and has recently suffered a health event that's made that even more complicated. So the point being, there are so many things going on for every single person that we're engaging with, and the extent to which you can't connect with every person at that deep personal level, of course, but the extent to which you can start from the observation that I don't understand what's going on in that person's life at the moment, and as a result, I'm not sure how exactly I'm going to come across to them.
Yeah.
So, less haste, and more sort of engaging with people, connecting.
Yeah.
That's the way in which you start to communicate, I think, more effectively.
Yeah, and I love. In fact, I did 7 keynote webinars on Thursday and Friday last week around Are You OK 365, about this concept of really embedding it in the culture. And I started off each one by the quote, be kind, everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle you know nothing about. And I think it's very, very true. We've all been affected in different ways by the pandemic. We've had people that, parents that are homeschooling, which I just can't imagine. My kids are older now and I don't have that issue. But also, there's been weddings that have to be postponed. There's been funerals that have had to be just 10 people when it's been in full lockdown. And so everyone has had just a extraordinary time, and just trying to understand what that is really important. One of the things I do in my webinars is ask people to nominate what's been most stressful about it. And it has been the uncertainty. That's nominated every single time as the leading element. And how do you help people in Microsoft to come to terms with the uncertainty?
I'm going to answer that question, but I might ask you one just before I do, if that's okay.
Sure, no worries.
How do you then connect, given you've just talked about that same thought around each person having such an individual experience, and you were talking about, kicking off those other webinars. So how do you create that bridge with a person or with an audience, as you keep that thought in mind that each person has got such a very different set of experiences, and right now has a very different set of reactions to the moment we find ourselves in?
Well, as last Thursday was Are You OK Day, and Friday was World Suicide Prevention Day. And I have my own lived experience of really battling with depression and going through a very, very difficult period where I was unemployed. And on July 24, 2004, I wrote this note to my family. My dear family, after 4 long years of battling this illness, I just can't take it anymore. I feel I have tried everything and just can't see anything but a depressed future. I'd like to thank everyone for the loving care you've shown me. I couldn't ask for anything more. Please don't blame yourself in any possible way for this, as there is nothing possibly you could have done. Love always, Graham. P.S. I just can't be a burden any longer. Now, I very rarely use that, but I just thought it was really, really relevant. And the reason it was relevant was that, I know what it's like to feel that there is no hope. You're 110% sure you won't recover it. But I have a really, really good and meaningful life now. And that's why I'm so passionate about Are You OK? Because I know what leads people to contemplate suicide, but I also know that, you just got to get through it, and you can get through it if you have the right support and the right expert guidance. So, and I've come to understand that my story is really important. So that's how I did it last week.
That's awesome. What a act of generosity to share that story as you did last week and again here, Graham, because that is at the heart of human connection, isn't it? It's showing a little bit of vulnerability, a lot of vulnerability, and acknowledging that things aren't perfect. And yet, as you say, oftentimes, certainly when we get to the topic of suicide, people contemplate permanent solutions to what turn out to have been temporary problems. And I don't use that term to diminish the sense of despair or concern that you might have been experiencing, or for that matter, the many people who find themselves in a similar place. But it's proven to be the case, hasn't it, over so many years? And obviously, in your case, that it was a time that you needed to endure to get through, to get to the other side.
Yeah, and when I met Gavin Larkin, the founder of Are You OK, back in 2009, I just really resonated with it because I knew that having the support of those around you was a really, really important element. And I remember about 2 weeks after that suicide attempt, I was in the kitchen with my mother, feeling very sorry for myself, saying, "Why me? Why me? Why me?" And she fixed me with one of those real mother stares and said, "I believe you'll use this experience to help other people." And to be honest, I thought that was crazy at the time, but it did really sow a seed. And, I did start to come out of it and write several books in the Back from the Brink range. And yeah, it is just, you were talking before about the purpose of the Corporate Mental Health Alliance, and the same with Are You OK, whose purpose is a conversation could change a life. And it's a brilliant tagline because everyone can relate to it.
Totally. As a quick aside, my wife works for Lifeline, and there are 3 steps that they talk about: helpless, hopeless, and alone. Where those conditions exist, all 3 at the same time, that can often lead to crisis. And so it just connects again very directly with that idea of a conversation changing a life, or connection between each of us, and the power of storytelling, and how a little bit of vulnerability can break down some of the barriers that might otherwise exist, so that we can actually have a real conversation. And so again, good on you for your role modeling and how you are sharing your story to help others.
Yeah, thank you. Earlier this year, I lost my father. He was 91. He had a good life, but it was a big, big shock. And not a big shock. It wasn't a shock, but it was just quite profound, having someone in your life who was no longer there. And I know you lost your father, was it last year?
It was actually a few years ago. It was 2016. So yeah, it was a big moment in my life. As I look back, yeah.
And what do you think were some of the key lessons you learned from your father?
A couple. One, and this is my dark sense of humour coming out, Graham, but in Dad's, without going into all the gory details, Dad suffered from cancer, and it was a 2-year process where he was in a slow decline. As sad as that is to say, that was the sort of path that he followed. And I remember at one stage during that period, probably about halfway through, he made a request to myself and my 2 brothers that he wanted to die at home, to establish palliative care, and for us to organise that for him at home. And at the time, like any dutiful son, I think you're like, right on, Dad. You bet, we'll do that. Not having any clue whatsoever what we just agreed to do. And so that set off a chain of events that created a range of tensions and pressures and issues in our lives as a family, my brothers and mine. And I reflect on that because I learned a lot from that period about the first lesson about again, learning, because I could have and perhaps should have asked around to find out a little bit more about what I was committing us to and exactly how that would play out. There are lots of people around who are very happy to help, because guess what? We've all got parents, and many of us have been through this before. Yeah. So again, sharing and just actually reaching out to other people. I also learned, and I've shared this in other conversations, Graham, something I'm not proud of, but there was a very selfish reaction that I had at that time. I had been at Microsoft, actually. I'd just joined a couple of years earlier. I was trying to, play my role at work. And I think this is something that many people can relate to. You've got that sense of duty or sense of responsibility that you've got to show up and play your role in a work environment and try to pretend that you're not an emotional being or a son or a father or all the other roles that you play at the same time. My selfish reaction was I almost begrudged in the end the demands that I was under, because I had work demands, I had family demands, I wife and 3 kids. And then, I'm trying to provide 24/7 care with my brothers to my father in an apartment in Valgalla. So, and quite obviously, I wasn't doing it all, and I was doing it badly, falling behind, feeling under pressure, and then, begrudging that situation I was in. So this sort of selfish reaction that I'm not proud of, but I absolutely remember, and it still stings me today to think back on that time. More positively, Dad taught me everything about how to be, a man, a husband, a son. I owe him everything that I have, and so that sense of duty was, very strong and rightfully so. I've now, I think, reached a point where I can put a few of the lessons in perspective and, acknowledge my own failings, quite frankly, and reflect on what a wonderful father he was in so many ways, and how much I've learned as a result of the experience that I hope in some way, Graham, I can share with my children, because I know I won't be asking that same question of my kids.
Yeah, one of the things that I did, which worked really well, I had the privilege of delivering the eulogy, and so I reached out to 35 people that knew Dad best, both in his personal life and work, and asked them to put 3 words together, and I formed a word cloud.
Right.
And the biggest messages there were, generosity, care, cheeky. And it really formed, I guess, the great framework for, for the message. And, it is wonderful to think, and I've got, a picture of him up here right beside me now, just just I guess, to be very grateful of having a great father, like it sounded like you did as well, because as I've learned, and I'm sure you have, there's many that don't have that. And it's obviously much more challenging.
Very cool.
When it comes to self-care, what sort of things do you do to keep your own fuel tank full?
I think years and years ago, I realized, and perhaps this was a lesson from my mother, actually, about the importance of physical health and just, physical activity. So I have always, from a self-care point of view, been focused on whether it's physical activity, exercise, sport, having fun outdoors. And so I still do that today. And I find it's a massive boost and relief, both physically, because you feel, after you've been for a run or go to the gym or go for a paddle, you feel the sense of exertion, but it's a positive sense. But also I think later on in my life, I've come to realize the connection between the mind and the body, and the very, very direct benefits it has from a mental point of view as well, because I can go for a run or go for a paddle and come back and be much clearer. And I can, the difference is so stark in terms of my ability to focus, my ability to be creative, to come up with answers to problems that I might be grappling with. And just to be more balanced, I think, ready to deal with whatever comes along in the day. When I'm not doing that, when I'm not exercising, not paying attention to those things, and not being focused on that, mental clarity and creating a space, I get short-tempered, I'm grumpy, and don't think as clearly and aren't as creative. And so it's great to realize that now. I wish I'd realized that about 30 years ago.
Better late than never, eh? Better late than never.
Yeah.
I've heard you nominate Buddha in Blue Jeans as a really important book that you've read. Can you tell us a little bit about that book and why it really resonated with you?
It's an awesome book, and I've read several variations of a theme on Buddhism. And why does it resonate so much with me, and why that book? It's because as I became interested in this intersection between physical health and mental health, I also became aware then of the connection with the spiritual side, and that can be religion, it can be a simple belief in something bigger than yourself, or whatever definition that you might use for that third aspect of spiritual health. And as I started to explore that or get interested in that, I read as many books as I could find. But the principles of Buddhism I resonate with very much, because obviously over thousands of years they've proven to be they've proven their worth. And I won't suggest for a moment that I'm an adherent to Buddhist principles, but the idea that life is much about suffering, and it is about pain that you experience through your life, but that suffering comes about as a consequence of craving for other things, always looking for that next positive hit, whether it's physical or mental. The idea of craving for something else, always looking for the next thing. It didn't take me too long to realize that, yes, that could be at the heart of why we experience pain, and the idea that pain is a natural part of life. We all experience it. We've just talked about our fathers. We're born, we live, and we die, and that's the natural part of, that's the natural way of things. But the idea that much of the suffering that we experience on a day-to-day, our disappointment that we didn't get that promotion, or the disappointment that someone didn't return our phone call, or I'm engaged in a negotiation with a client, the client doesn't see it exactly the same way that I do. Those moments of suffering, as small as those examples might be, all the way up to very big moments of suffering, in many cases, I think, if not in every case, can be drawn back to our desire for something else, and lack of appreciation for the moment that we have right now. And so, you and I are having this wonderful conversation. This is the only thing that matters right now, Graham, because we're here today, right now, looking at each other through and obviously recording this podcast. That's the moment that we're in, and the appreciation of that moment, and the fact that we have that moment, and we're lucky to have it. We're lucky to have had our fathers. We're lucky to have had the upbringing we've had. We're lucky for so many things. That changes the mindset that you might have then in terms of how you address the challenges that come along. And so the third thought after, life is about suffering, and that suffering comes from craving, is then the idea of developing then more awareness. And this is where being mindful and focusing on the moment we're in, breathing, right? I mean, and as simple as that sounds, when I first came across this, I thought, how odd is it that someone's going to talk about the importance of breathing? Of course we all breathe. But we don't, vast majority of us don't breathe well. And what does that mean? It means we don't breathe deeply, and we don't use that breath to center us, to acknowledge the moment we're in, to be thankful for who we are, where we are, and to then choose to use that to create a sense of equanimity that can then allow us to deal with the next moment, which may not be that positive. It might be a good one, might be a bad one. Either way, we're going to deal with it. And then that moment will pass and the next one will be with us. And so that's where my investigation, exploration into Buddhism stops, because I haven't then gone on to the 8 steps of enlightenment. Maybe later in my career, I'll have time to go further there. I think I've learned so much from thinking about those topics, and Buddha in Blue Jeans, I'd recommend it to anyone.
And the concept of mindfulness, everyone can understand the benefit of it, but it's quite hard to actually do, isn't it? And do you have any practices in place which help you to, just be centered during the day?
Yeah, I'm a poor practitioner, I'll acknowledge, but I have learned the power of slowing down and breathing. And as odd as that, someone listening to this will be saying, how weird does that sound? But if I have a performance moment, a simple example, Graham, where I'm presenting, I might be chairing a meeting of the Alliance, And I obviously want to make sure I come across well and that we have a positive discussion before the meeting starts, or even as the meeting is starting. I'm centering myself. I'm consciously thinking about slowing my pulse down. I'm consciously thinking about my breath, as I am right now talking to you. And I'm consciously thinking about where I want to direct my attention. And as easy as that sounds, it is very hard to do. But if you practice, you can get to a point, and as I said, I'm imperfect at it, but you can get to a point where the argument that you might have just had with your spouse, or the argument you might have just had with your child about studying for an exam, I'm just picking a couple of recent examples for me, or the fact that you used the last of the milk as you came up to sit down for this meeting. Some of those things happened this morning, Graham. I'll let you work that. You can put those to the side, and you can center yourself on, I'm now talking with a group of people who aren't aware of any of that and really don't want to be aware of any of that. And I don't want it to impact how I come across. So, back to that, we talked about intent and impact. My intent in my conversation is to be fully present with you today, Graham, because I'd like to have this wonderful discussion and this great exchange. But I can't do that if I'm thinking about the milk that I've just used, or the argument, or the next thing that's coming up, the next meeting. So I think it's practice. Like most things in my life, I've just practiced, and whatever skills I've built, good, bad, or indifferent, are the consequence of good, bad, or indifferent practice, I think.
Yeah. And is meditation part of that as well, regular meditation, or not really?
Yeah, I mean, it has been, but I won't suggest that I'm a regular or a great meditator. I mean, those that are will talk about their practice, and every day and multiple times a day they'll engage in meditative state, and that's not me. And this is where I fall down. I often find other excuses, other reasons not to make that time. But then I've also developed the capability, or the ability when I'm exercising. I find this is almost meditation for me. When I'm paddling, or I'm running, or I'm in the gym, there's a sense of calm that I have either cultivated or that I pursue at a mental level. I really love being active, and it's a privilege, right, during any day to have that time to go and do something that I personally love doing. And whether it is a run, or a paddle, or a swim, or going sailing, or take your pick, taking the dogs for a walk, there's this sense of connection with something that I really love. And it's almost like a meditation for me, because I will come back from whatever that is, and I will absolutely feel mentally refreshed. So I think identifying that, finding out what has worked for me, because I used to have a routine where I would try to get up every day and meditate, and it wasn't working for me, Graham. And so I've had to find other ways that fit with my lifestyle, but also give me the most efficient way of achieving at least a semblance of balance and calm that I hope to exude on any given day. Yeah,
that's great insight. Really is. I guess to segue back to the company again, I saw on the Great Places to Work website that 93% of Microsoft employees believe it's a great place to work. How did you go about achieving that? That's a pretty remarkable result, because by contrast, the average is 55% of employees believe it's a great place to work. That's a big difference. What do you think contributes to that big difference in score?
Look, I think first thought, of course, is we're a privileged space, Graham. I mean, a wonderful tech company at this time in particular. I mean, privilege is piled on top of privilege, right? Work has always been a thing that we do, not a place that we go, and the ability to work through lockdown for the vast majority of our team was something that we're doing before the pandemic. And so I think there's a deep acknowledgement of that in the company, and I know that's part of why people think it's a great place to work, because we have very flexible work practices that we are able to offer because of the position we're in. Many companies are not, right? And so I don't for a moment underestimate, the fortune that we have as a result of what we do and who we are. Second thought would be, this is where leadership really matters. Satya Nadella, our CEO, to the extent you've read or heard anything of Satya, is at the heart of what Microsoft is all about today, or the company that we have evolved to become and are still, evolving as we look forward. But at the heart of Satya and his story, he's an Indian immigrant who became the CEO of Microsoft, now the second largest company on the planet, and famously will be remembered as the person that more than anyone else helped to reposition the company, given where we were going back to 2014 when he was appointed. And so I think he has created an environment for us all where we talk openly about connecting our personal passion with the platform that is Microsoft. Our mission to empower every organization and every person on the planet to achieve more is a beautiful collection of words, but what does it mean? It means that if I am passionate about mental health, then as I talked to him about this 3 years ago when he was out here, and I was talking to him about the Alliance, and I'm like, well, Satya, I'm going to use the company's resources, I'm going to use my time, I'm going to bring together some clients. There's no direct payback for Microsoft out of this. Are you okay for me to do it? He looked at me and said, well, why are you asking? Of course, go do it. and so that's one example. But every person in the company, and this is my role here locally, is encouraged to do the same. What's your personal passion? What's important to you? And it's really, I want to be a better salesperson, or I want to hit my quota. As important as that is, right? That's rarely the thing that really gets any individual out of bed in the morning. It's usually something else, something that's not really directly connected with, their formal role. It might be, but in many cases, it might be something else. They want to contribute to mental health, or they want to contribute to helping people get jobs in the industry, or education, or healthcare, or 53,000 other things. And so my job here is to make sure that we afford that opportunity to every person. And I know, again, that would be part of the reason why 93% of the team suggest that it's a great place to work, because that's not surprisingly, Graham, for all of us, that's what we care about. What are the things that really matter? And if I can bring that to work and I can talk openly about it, and the company is going to support me to pursue it in a meaningful way, that's pretty awesome. And we're not the only ones that offer that opportunity, I know, but I equally know it's a big reason why people love working at Microsoft. Certainly why I love being here.
Yeah, I've seen his speech when he first became CEO, and it was very powerful because he talked about two of his kids having learning difficulties, and tapping into the assets of technology and artificial intelligence to help improve it. And it obviously now has become core to the DNA of the organization. And it's a very, very interesting story because he wasn't brought in from the outside to really turn around the company. He'd been a long-term, very successful employer. I think his previous role was in charge of the cloud division. But how do you think he was able to affect this huge change, even though he'd been in the company a long time?
I think you might expect me to say this, but it's genuinely meant that he's perhaps the best role model of all of the things we've just been talking about. Talked earlier about vulnerability, right? Sharing what's going on in your life so that and in order to better connect with those around you. It's quite extraordinary, right? In the early days of his tenure as CEO, he wrote a book, hit refresh, that went out to all of the employees across the company, and is obviously available publicly, where he declared some very, very personal aspects, including what you've just shared here, two of his children with severe learning challenges. And guess what? He's role modeling what it means to connect personal passion with the platform, because he said, do you know what? Technology is doing so many wonderful things. Why don't we help direct it to do a better job of allowing those with a short or long-term disability to better connect in the world around them? You bet. And for the 1 in 5 Australians, Graham, and obviously the same statistic around the world, there are hundreds of millions of people that could better connect with the world around them if technology was more usable and was more directed at those with a vision impairment or a learning impairment or a sight impairment. And so role modeling that, I think, has opened everyone's eyes to, well, okay, if the boss thinks he's going to do that, then and he's encouraging us to do the same, then we should follow his lead. The other thought that I should mention is that early on he also shared, he's a prolific reader, and he shared a book that he read called Mindset by Carol Dweck. He's going back many years now. And Carol Dweck, very famous for her work, growth mindset, fixed mindset. And the other theme that he popularized alongside the idea of empathy, truly connecting with the customers and the partners in the market, the world you want to serve, demonstrate more empathy, develop empathy so that you can truly understand what the customers are looking for. I think that's one theme. The second theme is then the importance of a growth mindset, which is, if you feel like you're, you have a complete understanding of all of the issues at play, then you're clearly on the wrong track. We should aspire to be learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. And again, it's a pithy statement, but what does it mean? It means a little bit of humility goes a long way. A little bit of acknowledgement that we can't ever truly understand what the other person is experiencing. We can try by being empathetic, but the best way is, of course, to use our ears and mouth in proportion. Stop telling and start listening. And these are again easy things to say, but when you role model it so effectively, it is amazing the impact that one person has had and continues to have on 150,000 employees all around the globe.
Yeah, it is remarkable. And one thing that struck me in the book, Hit Refresh, which I really, really enjoyed, was his statement that it's a leader's job to find stuff going right when you're going through transformation, because it's easy to look about things that are going wrong, but to find things going right. Is that something you try to adopt as well?
Absolutely try to. I have to acknowledge, another deficit or area for improvement for me. My professional life, Graham, I think I'm not unlike many others, is all about trying to close gaps, right? I mean, as a professional manager, I've always worked in large companies. You run a business and you're perpetually focused on the things that aren't where they need to be and how you're going to close that gap. And that's how it should be, right? To get the best performance, you want to focus on the things that aren't working, try to drive them to closure. And yet, if that's your mindset, and if you're unconscious that that's your mindset, then guess where you tend to, what you talk about, what you focus on, how you communicate with your team. Back to intention and impact. Your intention is, I want this business to be really successful. But the impact is, Steven's just talking about the things that aren't working again. And he's talking about how the gaps and all the things we aren't doing well just yet. So I think it's absolutely vital, and Satya is spot on as usual. And it's something I'm continuing to work on.
As we all are. Can you think of a time when you've asked someone, "Are you okay?" and it made a real difference?
I've asked the question a lot, and over the years, and of course last week for "Are you okay, Dave?" where it's made a big difference. I remember a situation years ago with a mate of mine where it's a funny thing about maybe Australian males, Graham, and I'm not going to give a psychological assessment of the Australian population here, but there is this thing about, we don't like to share. I'm generalizing here, and I'm sure there'll be many people who'll disagree with me, which is cool. But I on balance, I'd suggest my experience at any rate is Australian males generally won't share a lot of emotional content. It's more about getting together, sharing some stories, a few laughs, and perhaps enjoying an activity together, whether that's sporting or other. And I remember a situation a few years ago where I just paused for a moment to actually really ask a mate if he was okay, and was surprised to discover that he really wasn't. And that led to a really interesting and positive conversation that reaffirmed for me the important role that I had to play at that moment, and also opened my eyes to the thought, I wonder how many of those moments I've missed with other mates. So So, I think for all the reasons we've been through, pausing, this is back to mindfulness in a way, isn't it? Because the triggers are often there, or the signals are often there. It's just that we don't see them because we're too wound up in what's going on in our heads and our lives, that we don't stop for a moment. We don't role model what empathy really means, which is put yourself in the other person's shoes. Listen to what they're saying because they're giving you the triggers, and then pick up on them and ask a couple of questions.
And can you recall a time when you've been asked, "Are you okay?" and it was really appreciated and really, really helped?
Yeah, just last week actually. I think I've learned that sharing a bit more of what's going on in my personal life is valuable to create connection. And I mentioned earlier, my mother had a recent health event, which was just last week actually. And so I was out of action for a little while, and the team, I missed a few meetings with the team, and we had a team meeting earlier this week, and I shared that with the team what had happened. And I've had several of the team actually independently now ask me, am I okay? How am I going? Which I guess in a way has been much appreciated, but also reinforces the importance of stopping and connecting with each team member, because again, how often I reflect when a personal sharing has occurred in the team meeting from someone else, have I really stopped, and then have I followed up afterwards, a day later, a week later, whatever, to ask that person if they're okay? I'd like to think that I have, but I'm imperfect, and so it caused me to reflect on making sure that I look out for my team as much as they're looking out for me.
Yeah, it's been an absolute fantastic discussion, Steve. I've really enjoyed it. Just a couple more questions. 5 years from now, how will we know if the Corporate Mental Health Alliance has been successful?
I think we'll know it's been successful if the conversation that we're having is going beyond the observation of the issue and the massive impact that poor mental health is having in the workplace, to a normalized conversation where it is as regular to talk about someone going to work and coming home from work safely. We've talked about physical safety, Graham, for decades, right? Yeah. It's just an absurd. No one would question that going to work and coming home from work is a good thing for a workplace to help ensure all that. If someone had a broken arm or a broken leg and turned up to work tomorrow, you might ask them, "Oh, wow, what did you do? How'd you do that?" That it is as normal as that conversation as it is in terms of their psychological safety. And that every business leader, and maybe we won't get there in 5 years, but I'd like to think most business leaders, certainly our largest organisations across the country, are more proficient in the topic and leading an effort that is more substantive than what we see across the board today. As much progress as we know is being made, this is a massive issue. The Productivity Commission will tell us from a productivity point of view how big it is. Lawyers will tell us the liabilities that leaders have if they don't get this right. And so I'd love to think in 5 years' time that we have normalized the conversation, and that workplace mental health, psychological safety, psychosocial health is a topic and a conversation that is as regular as, yes, how are you feeling today, and did you get over that cold, or is that broken arm healing?
Yeah. And if you had the opportunity to go back, knowing what you know now, go back to your 18-year-old self and just give some guidance or tips, what would that be?
Yeah, look, we talked earlier about my father. My achievement index is perhaps my competitive streak, and my achievement index is on the sort of the upper end of the range, I think, if I think back over both my sporting and career exploits. And I think my advice to my 18-year-old self would be to be less focused on climbing up that ladder and more focused on the skills and experiences that I'm having along the way.
What great advice. Thanks so much, Steve. It's been a wonderful chat.
Thank you, Graham.
Thanks for joining us today. I hope you've learned something new and heard some practical tips you can try with your team.